Good morning, guys. It is Wednesday, January 31st, 2024, end of the month. This is Bathrobe Business. I got my coffee and I got the news. First story we'll just talk about is the Federal Reserve. So, the Fed meeting is ending today. It's a 2 day meeting. They are expected to really leave interest rates unchanged. However, they probably are going to signal what's coming in the next few months. Most people say that they are anticipating cuts. This whole time I was claiming I think that's being overly ambitious because there's still a lot of data that shows that inflation is still higher than it appears. But there is new data out today that may be proving me wrong. Last week I was proven wrong by the fact of new inflation numbers came out that showed inflation was less than anticipated for the year. And now we've got new payroll data coming out today. Now, this is not the the labor report from the government. This is just ADP private payrolls. But this is usually not, I wouldn't say as the same measure, but it's still a pretty powerful measure. I would say it's an alternative measure to the labor report that the government issues. Private payrolls in January slowed to 107,000. The expectation was 158,000 new jobs, but it's actually substantially less, about 50,000 jobs less than anticipated. The major growth is still leisure and hospitality, with an addition of 28,000 workers in that trade alone. Transportation and utilities added about 23,000, and construction rose by 22,000. The release of this comes about 2 days ahead of the labor market report. So that report should be coming out on Friday. However, there are other inflationary pressures. Oil, that's the big one that is starting to rise steadily. Brent and crude oil is coming up. This is mainly due to the conflicts within the Middle East right now. So conflict within the Middle East, it's pushing oil to have its first real raise in prices since September. And this could be a powerful inflationary pressure if it continues. At the same time, homes are actually slowing. So home sales are slowing, but not for the reason you think. Current interest rates are actually still at 6.78% for the average home in America. However, the lack of demand is forcing people not to purchase homes, seeing as how they're constantly still getting outcompeted. Remember, we did talk about that prices on homes are set to increase this year by several percentages. So we're still facing a lack of supply for homes on the market. The next story, it's actually the last story I'll cover today, is just about cars. China is steadily increasing their output of cars globally. So they came in close to beating Japan. Japan is not a small car manufacturer. Now, this data is based on domestic production. So obviously Japan has Toyota, Honda plants here in the United States. These numbers do not factor into that. But just based on a country basis, I think it's still very impressive. So Japan exported about 5.97 million vehicles last year. China exported about 5.22 million cars globally. So they are inching closer and closer to matching Japan's output, which is incredibly impressive, seeing as how big of a behemoth Japan is in the car manufacturing sphere. Especially that their industry is, 100 plus years old. Maybe not quite 100 plus years old. But we're talking 80, 90 years of production. And China is pretty much a new entry into the market. Now, 70% of it is still traditional combustion engine. I know China is pushing hard for EVs. Their domestic EV company, BYD, is outselling Tesla in China, and they are pushing to export them globally. Their major push is actually into Europe. That's where most of their electric cars are being pushed into. Those sales are still slow and minimal, so they're focusing right now on the UK and Belgium, but they are steadily increasing that. Most of these combustion engines are primarily going to Russia. That's not a surprise, seeing as how once the war started, there was a major blockade on all car sales into the country. So they have a need for car manufacturers because they don't have domestic car production, which is kind of insane because the Soviet Union did. The Soviet Union did have car manufacturing domestically, but Russia did not retain any of it post-fall. So Russia is a huge purchaser of Chinese cars. But then the second biggest is actually Mexico. So Mexico is actually purchasing a fair amount of the cars that are coming out of China as well. This is pretty interesting considering that the United States is right here, and we are. I mean, if we don't play our cards right, this is going to be a scenario where China is able to outsell us in a market that is steadily growing. I think people underestimate how powerful Mexico is as a purchasing and growing country. So this is something that the United States needs to pay attention to and push hard into Mexico, because otherwise, in a few years, we will see China starting to dominate that market as well. And once something is in Mexico, it's just a short time until it makes its way into the United States directly. That's kind of it. I'm keeping it short and sweet. I will mention one thing that we often, that I have not mentioned in a few days, maybe it's been a week or so, is gold prices. So even though inflation is supposedly down, gold is still ticking up. So remember, we kept talking about gold being at a baseline of $2,040, that it seemed to have hit that little ceiling, or I should say floor, and has now really dropped below it. Right now, gold is at $2,060. So it's steadily creeping up. I am a little surprised by that, seeing as how if we're anticipating rate cuts and we're anticipating lower inflation numbers, that number should be ticking down as well. So I don't think the story is as simple as people make it seem to be. That's pretty much it. That's the stories for the day. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning. Have a productive day.